Welcome to today's episode of Lead Ahead. I'm Nita, here with Jake and Nadia, and we're excited to dive into this conversation with you. As MBA graduates stepping into the fast-paced world of business leadership, you're likely hearing that success isn't just about your technical knowledge, but also about how you lead. In today's episode, we're going to explore one of the most critical leadership skills for modern leaders, emotional intelligence. By the end of this episode, you'll have a deeper understanding of how emotional intelligence can transform you from a competent manager to an inspiring leader. We'll dive into its core components, discuss its relevance in an AI-driven world, and most importantly, provide actionable insights on how you can apply emotional intelligence to enhance your leadership. So before we get into it, I want to talk a little bit about what is emotional intelligence. And from some of the readings in our class, Daniel Goleman outlined in his research, emotional intelligence is made up of 5 components: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. And these components essentially work together to help leaders connect with their teams, manage their own emotions, and influence others effectively. So I guess I'll start with asking my team, and I'm here with Jake and Nadia. Are there any situations where you've realized that self-awareness has really helped you to respond better as a leader?
Yes, so I think I'll take that. I think just becoming aware of my own stress really helped me kind of adjust to my teammates, whether that's in school or work, and kind of just like managing, conflict in conversations and kind of communicate better. I think that kind of helped me a lot, and just being aware of those like emotions and like being aware of how people like kind of reading the room is really important if people are not being in the mood to have certain conversation, just like being aware of that is really goes a long way in conversations.
Absolutely. And I think we talked about that in one of the activities in our class as well, just reading the room, right? Like, are we coming in, what was it? I think it was being attractive or confident. What's the vibe? We got to kind of meet the level of whatever emotion the room is carrying. Jake, what about you?
Yeah, I've definitely had to do some self-reflecting in terms of working on my emotional intelligence. I definitely have noticed that by reflecting on how I interact with my coworkers, I can definitely kind of read their reactions a little bit better. So I know that just personally, I'm quite defensive, and I kind of learned that just through even some of the quizzes that we did in class, where it's like I'm high levels of emotionality, high levels of agreeableness, where I'll work well in a team setting, but sometimes if I feel like someone is saying that I did something wrong or did something poorly, I can kind of deflect and be a little bit defensive. And now I'm kind of starting to notice that in the workplace, and I can kind of use my self-reflection to improve how I respond to people. So that's kind of been a helpful one for me.
Yeah, awesome. No, I agree. I think it's really hard sometimes to kind of come to face the reality of what those quizzes sometimes tell you.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
oh, I
I'm
realize I
used
was,
to I'm used to looking at those kinds of things and it's like, oh, these are all my strengths, but
yeah.
there's not a ton of quizzes that tell you what you're bad at.
Exactly. Yeah, and I agree, kind of adding on to what you guys have said, coming from a healthcare background, self-awareness is very interesting because it not only impacts how your coworkers kind of perceive you and how your shift goes, but also how your patients and their family see you as well. And depending on how comfortable they feel with you, they might not open up about certain things, and that can be a whole different um, conversation. But yeah, it impacts almost every part of your day if you're not aware of how you're feeling and what the situation of the room is that you're in. Great. What about strategies that you guys have maybe implemented or come across that helps you boost empathy in your leadership style?
I would say definitely just promoting active listening. I don't have to always be engaging in these conversations, just like rather listening in into conversations, ask questions, ask probing questions that kind of encourage them to kind of share more, maybe understand the situation better without necessarily giving any advice. Just listening them, maybe helping them kind of like coming to a solution themselves.
Yeah, that's a great point. Nadia and I took a class in summer together called Becoming Mentally Tough, and I think we really practiced how to listen without offering advice, which is actually harder than it sounds. But it really allows you to listen and ask just important probing questions rather than giving a solution. And I think that helps you understand the person a bit better and really come from that empathetic approach when having conversations.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'm a very big culprit of trying to offer solutions right away. I think going through my undergraduate business program at U of L, it's like so many case studies, so many times where you're very quickly trying to give the answer or try, very quickly trying to give advice to a business. And I have been finding myself not so great at just listening and trying to like just empathize like without offering advice. I know that my partner has also said to me like, "Oh, like you don't need to just throw solutions at me. Like you could just listen and try to feel how I'm feeling kind of thing." So I think yeah, that's definitely the empathy part that needs to be practiced actively in order to get better at. In terms of strategies for myself, one experience that really helped me work on my mental toughness and my active like empathy, I volunteered for the Calgary Distress Center on the crisis lines.
Nice.
So that was kind of a wake up call into active listening and practicing empathy and just how difficult and draining it can be. So I think some people may not practice empathy because they don't know how to, but I think some people tend to avoid it just because of the sheer energy that it takes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be really draining if you're not in that right mindset to really listen to someone, talk about some pretty heavy things or things that might take a lot of energy to understand and then ask those appropriate questions. So I can see how that can be really draining.
Yeah, so that would be my advice. I couldn't volunteer for forever there, but I did a couple of years volunteering there. They teach you all about mental health and mental toughness and how to empathize with people. So I'd
Mhm.
always recommend people if you're trying to work on your mental stability, your mental health knowledge. I always recommend volunteering with like a local nonprofit and just giving it a go. I know everyone's busy, but even if you just do it once a month or once every couple weeks, you can kind of practice your empathy in real time with people in your community.
No, that's a really good tip. All right. And what about how do we build and nurture those social skills that we briefly talked about earlier when it comes to improving team collaboration? So we've talked a little bit about self-awareness and self-regulation, a little bit about empathy, but what about other social skills that you think are important in a highly functioning team that helps you to work better with everyone else?
I think definitely like practice active listening with intention. I feel like a lot of us just like listen, but are we actually listening or are we zoning out? So really just practicing that and then just ask feedback regularly. Be present by asking questions, having these open-ended conversations. I think that really helps kind of nurture that and improve that team collaborations. Like if you don't know anything or something in particular, just always ask. There's nothing wrong with asking. And I feel like a lot of us just are taken aback by what if we're wrong or what if we make a fool of ourselves, but that shouldn't be the reason. So that's definitely a thing that kind of builds that strong team connections and should be the focus on.
Hmm. Yeah, no, very good point. Jake, what about you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think some of the things that I actively try to practice in my team setting at work would be in terms of active listening, trying to remember things from like the past week or two, just to show to that person that I was listening. So, for example, I am someone with really strong ADHD tendencies, so sometimes active listening is really difficult, and I kind of want to get to the work, get to the point of the meeting, but I know that I have to really work on slowing it down and actively listening and actively asking someone about how they are. So one thing I try to do is if I know that my coworker was involved in a play, like for example, one of my coworkers is assistant stage manager in his spare time for a local theater. So I really try to remember his schedule outside of work. So it's like, oh, I remember you had your rehearsal last week. Like, how did that go? And I find if you can remember small things like that about someone's life outside of work, it can really get them engaged and brought back into the meeting and get them kind of motivated because you're showing that you care, you're showing that you've listened, and you've kind of brought it back full circle.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And again, coming from my work experience in healthcare, sometimes I've seen the opposite of that, where our managers really lack those social skills. And a big aspect of that is you don't really have a relationship where you can just talk like two humans. It's very much, I'm the manager, you're the nurse, you're the doctor, you're the physiotherapist. Like we really have different worlds and we don't really need to have a conversation. And it really does impact how the team works together and how the environment really kind of functions. And so when you do have the person that does take that step to actually have those conversations and like ask about your day, ask about your kids, ask about your life outside of work or school, it really does make a lasting impression, I think. And I think the opposite also leaves an impression, but kind of has the opposite effect as well. So it's a really good point. And it's hard remembering people's names and their what they do for fun and their dogs' names and everything. So it's definitely a skill that takes some practice.
Yeah, names have been my one of my biggest weaknesses going into the MBA program is just remembering everyone in the cohort's names. It's like I'm good with
Yeah,
faces, but names just are such a tough one for me.
it's hard, but yeah, I got to get better at that too, actually. But I'm near the end now, so I wonder if that's something that I'll ever really get better. Great. Thanks, guys. Now we're going to talk a little bit about cognitive intelligence. So we've talked a little bit about emotional intelligence. But as we're kind of in this program, a lot of us are probably thinking, what about all the technical knowledge that we've gained from the MBA? Because that's usually why we started the program anyways, was to get, more technical knowledge that we can apply in future leadership roles. And so while intelligence is essential for problem solving and strategic thinking, like we mentioned earlier, it's often emotional intelligence that really does differentiate successful leaders. So Justin Menkes, in his article Hiring for Starts, emphasizes that while cognitive intelligence is important, it is emotional intelligence that drives leadership success because managing people effectively requires empathy, understanding, and interpersonal relationships, especially in today's AI dominated world. So kind of based off of this little blurb I just read, how do you guys manage to balance cognitive intelligence and emotional intelligence when it comes to making decisions?
I would say maybe just have a combination of both, depending on the situation. So really just go in, assess the situation, read the room, have like see what effects it has on people, and just kind of like use a blend of both, um, depending on that situation.
Yeah, this is an interesting question because I feel like I'm not often thinking about what's cognitive versus what's technical, but I would say coming into the MBA program, I expected to use more technical skills, but I've found myself using more soft skills. So I've been flexing a lot of the networking muscles that I haven't used in quite a while, where a lot of it is talking to your peers, a lot of group discussions and case analysis, where sure, you need to have those analytical skills to discuss the case, but just as important, you need to be able to find a group in your class to discuss it with and kind of listen to their ideas and kind of work off of each other, which I think is largely soft skills over technical skills. If I had to break down the balance of what I've kind of been doing, I would say it's been like 80% soft skills and 20% technical skills because it's been a lot of team projects, a lot of group work. A lot of the tools we use are pretty basic and standard from what I did in my undergrad. So the Microsoft Office suite of products, like just using Word and PowerPoint and whatnot. But there is that small 20% of technical skills that I'm also trying to use. Like, for example, I'm for my MBA concentration, I'm doing the data analytics concentration. So I've taken my first data class this semester where I'm learning to do programming in the R language, and that's been a huge learning curve for me. So that's kind of where that 20% technical comes into play, where a lot of my other classes have been really soft skill oriented, like with the leadership class, with entrepreneurship, a lot of theory, a lot of talking to your peers and explaining your experiences together. But then classes like the programming classes are that 20% where you really need to just kind of hunker down and like focus on how are you actually going to write this code and get it to work. And I find that super difficult. So I would say that that's probably where I'm struggling the most is on the technical side.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
And I agree with you, Jake. If we kind of bring this into practice, like I know in episode 2, I'm going to be touching base on that a little bit. But like in, let's say you're a recent grad and like you're applying for jobs, right? Your resume kind of like shows that technical experiences that you have, but is when you meet the interviewer is when you kind of put that soft skills into play and you kind of like that it's like your communication skills comes into play even when you're presenting at school is all of that soft skills is really taking over you rather than your technical skills, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And
totally.
I know I briefly talked about AI as well, but I think a good segue, I guess, into talking about AI is that fear of is AI going to replace, humans? And I think we talked a little bit about this in Mally's class and how, yes, of course, AI has that algorithm. It can detect patterns. It can do a lot of like the technical stuff, not perfectly, but at a pretty decent level. But um, can it really replace that emotional intelligence that humans are capable of practicing and implementing in the workplace? And so, like you said, yeah, like it's yes, you do have to understand, the technicality of the skills, but how do you communicate that and how do you implement that and how do you inspire people with that? That is something that I think does differentiate, doesn't matter how many skills you have, doesn't matter how many courses you've taken. Are you able to establish a work environment as a leader that allows people to be influenced in a positive way with those skills and also learn new skills? It's not like we're done learning after we're done our degrees. Like it's a continuous journey, but to what extent are you willing to do that and be in that vulnerable and uncomfortable situation if you're not being supported by your work environment and your leaders? So that's kind of, again, I don't have a specific example yet, but I think that's how I see it is. And I think that's one thing that Mally's talked about a lot too is, sometimes it's just the attitude that you're coming in with versus are you meeting all the requirements on that job description, like the
Mhm.
technical requirements. Great. Now we sort of started talking about how to apply these emotional intelligence skills practically. Um, there's this quote here from one of Goleman's article called What Makes a Leader, and it's talking about the key differentiators for successful leadership. So, motivation, empathy, and social skills are about understanding and connecting with others. As a leader, your teams look to you for further direction and emotional support. When you're able to empathize with their needs and understand their motivations, you can lead them more effectively. When I read this quote, I was reminded of a conversation I had with my mentor last year. I did the BMO mentorship program, and she said one thing that she used for her, I guess, team building slash understanding how to be a better manager was understanding her team's love languages. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but there's this really popular relationship book called Understanding Your the Five Love Languages, and it's basically for you and your partner to see how they feel heard. And so it's listening or acts of service. Basically, she said using that approach that we use in our relationships and friendships and bringing it to work as a leader. So understanding, does this person require written validation? Does this person require an act of service? Does this person, giving gifts? Is that a part of, making them feel appreciated? So kind of tweaking it in a professional point of view, but really allowing yourself to put some effort into understanding how that person feels seen and heard was something that she talked about. And I thought that was really cool because we do that so consciously in our personal relationships, but do we do that in our professional workplace, obviously with boundaries, and what impact that could really have? So I guess for you guys, I have a question. In what ways can you motivate a team emotionally other than offering incentives? So if you are in a position where you are able to have some power and control over how your team gets, incentivized and how they kind of get treated for their successes, what ways can you motivate them to kind of reach those milestones?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have found myself needing to motivate outside of actual incentives. So like I'm a team lead at work now, but I don't have the responsibility for any kind of compensation or any kind of incentive building, like monetarily. So I've kind of had to rely on alternate ways to motivate my team. So an example would be, I would say one I really use is kind of that intellectual motivation, getting someone curious. So, for example, one of the people on my team is very data heavy, database administrator type guy. And sometimes if we get a question asked to us about our system, we aren't super quick to deal with it because we've got so much else going on. But I find if I do want us to prioritize that question, I can kind of do prodding questions and I'm like, oh, like, is this what's causing that? Or is this what's causing that? And then it almost lights a fire in that person to like prove me right or prove me wrong. They kind of want to get to the answer just because I've been asking kind of probing questions. And I feel like if you spark that curiosity in someone, it really kind of motivates them to take a deeper look at it. So that was one strategy that I've kind of used is to kind of just instigate that thought process because my team's really technically intelligent. So I find if I kind of ask little prodding questions about the root cause of some kind of problem in the system, that then I usually see them go off on their own and try to figure that out a lot sooner rather than if I were to just kind of say, "Oh, we'll get to that question when we get to it," kind of thing.
That's a really good point. And I think similar to kind of the role I have right now as a clinical instructor in the hospital is a lot of the students will get overwhelmed with, understanding their patients' medical history and the research they have to do. And so it can be hard to sometimes motivate them to understand, the importance of looking at the bigger picture, not just your tasks for the day, right? And so, similar to what you said, asking them relevant probing questions like, oh, why are they on this medication? And how does that relate to, their heart attack 3 years ago? And then as they kind of begin to connect the dots, they do get a little more motivated and they see like, they almost see that light bulb go off and they're like, oh yeah, there's a connection here and I figured that out and that's so cool. I wonder what else I can find. So it's not necessarily in a management role, but it is one way that you can kind of get that spark going and get them curious on their own. Nadia, what about you?
I think honestly, just being socially aware about the people, about what they value. Again, just like to add on what Jake and you said, just asking them probing questions, like really knowing what they want. And a lot of us, we don't really use the full scope of our brain, I think. I feel like we kind of use parts of it. So just like really asking a thought-provoking questions potentially motivates them and like really kind of like encourage them to having that curiosity, curious mindset and like, hope, yeah, I don't know, hopefully that kind of like brings some sort of a value to them because like not everything is kind of Not everything is about like money nowadays. I feel like different things kind of bring different values to people. So really just understanding people on a personal level sometimes, but again, just kind of matching that energy. You don't want to overstep your boundaries at the same time. So really match what they give you.
Yeah, absolutely. In summary, emotional intelligence isn't just an asset in today's business landscape, it is a necessity. While your MBA has equipped you with cognitive intelligence to handle complex problems, it is emotional intelligence that will truly set you apart as a leader. From self-awareness to empathy, these skills will not only help you navigate the interpersonal dynamics of leadership, but will also enable you to inspire and lead your team more effectively. Evidence from leadership experts like Daniel Goleman and Jeffrey Pfeiffer consistently shows that leaders who combine cognitive intelligence with emotional intelligence are far more successful in creating high-performing teams. As you move forward in your career, continue to hone these emotional intelligence skills. They will be key to your long-term success as a leader. Thank you for joining us today. Please join us next week for our next episode.